Are you feeling it too? Holding everyone else together while the world feels like it's falling apart. Welcome to the Relit Practice, the podcast for therapists, burnout recovery, and sustainable career support for psychologists, counselors, social workers, and other mental health professionals across public health, community agencies, and private practice. My name is Stacey Steele, and I'm a registered psychologist and EMDR consultant. Here, we talk honestly about burnout, moral injury, trauma work, and the systemic realities of helping professions while building practices and lives that are sustainable, ethical, and fulfilling. Everything on this podcast is guided by the Relit Practice 5 pillars: recognize and release burnout, repair and rewire overfunctioning patterns, restore our rhythms and regulation in day-to-day life, redesign our practice for long-term sustainability, and relight our passion so that we can stay in this work without losing ourselves. Today's episode is holding space while the world is on fire. We're not practicing in neutral times and really haven't had time to recover since COVID. We're holding space while immigration crackdowns escalate, war footage shows up before coffee, climate disasters displace families, healthcare systems are stretched, classrooms are packed, and economic pressure keeps rising. And we can't forget about the files. Many of our clients are directly impacted, and so are we. I don't know about you, but when I wake up in the morning and before I reach for my phone and open my news feed, I think about what fresh WTF are we in for today. Large-scale research now shows that when clinicians work through prolonged crisis and collective trauma, burnout rises in direct proportion to trauma exposure, not hours worked. Our nervous systems are reacting exactly as they're designed to do under threat. We're no longer outside putting out the fire. We're now inside the house as it burns, reading the same headlines, worrying about our own families, and living in the same uncertainty. This is a shared context with the people that we serve, and it has nothing to do with boundaries, over-identification with clients, and everything to do with reality. This is the reality of modern practice. There's still a myth in our field that we should be these neutral containers and that if we're impacted by this work, somehow we're less competent. But we are expected to regulate, contain, and make meaning out of what seems meaningless while metabolizing our own stress at the same time. But we are human too. When I was doing the show notes, I really wanted to be able to say that these are unprecedented times, but it's precedented, all right. Practicing and living through COVID changed how we approach burnout and clinician care. And now here we are again, the same but different. With COVID, we were dealing with one global pandemic and witnessing oppression in real time, supporting clients with BLM, the overturning of Roe v. Wade in the US, and Me Too. Now, collectively, it is the same but more. We all know the Mr. Rogers quote, "Look for the helpers. You will always find the people who are helping." For me, this has got me through many times. And it makes me wonder, what about us? What about the helpers? Who do we look to? Well, that has to be each other. And community makes the biggest difference in recovery from burnout and moral injury and getting through all of the global and local things happening to our lives and our clients' lives. The thing about burnout is that decades of research shows that it explodes when workload, control, fairness, and values are out of alignment with our work, especially when we're forced to practice in ways that are in conflict with our ethics. It's clear that burnout isn't just about too many sessions or boundaries or about work-life balance. Now, don't get me wrong, those do play a role, but rarely is it the origins. Several years ago, I was getting progressively closer to the edge of burnout for months, and eventually I did teeter over it. I was exhausted, mentally empty, and deeply ashamed. I was in a culture that preached wellness but held burnout in contempt, and I felt something was wrong with me as a human being. I did all of the things. I even moved to private practice full time. I took a yoga teacher training. I quit drinking. I made green smoothies. I meditated. I even took up furniture refinishing. Not well, but still I did it. I was starting to feel better. But it wasn't until I took inventory the last few years, personally and professionally, that I see where burnout language didn't quite cut it. Part of what I was going through was better explained by something else: moral injury. Moral injury is a lasting emotional and moral wound that happens when clinicians are forced to act against deeply held values, witness harm they can't prevent, or experience betrayal by systems in high-stakes situations. This often leads to guilt, shame, withdrawal, numbness, and disillusionment. It is an ethical injury. Recent North American research shows that nearly 40% of healthcare workers during COVID were experiencing moral injury, not just burnout. And the biggest drivers of that weren't personal coping skills or work-life balance. They were systemic conditions such as lack of support, short staffing, and loss of agency. I'll say that again, 40%. Since COVID, more and more of us are working with people who are falling through the cracks of the system. We have less control over our workload. Our caseloads may stay the same, but the complexity and acuity increases, and we're witnessing injustices in real time. It may feel like guilt because we think we're doing something wrong, anger because of what can be preventable but isn't, hopelessness that nothing will change, disillusionment with systems, and finally, withdrawal from the work, your relationships, and your life. This does not happen because you're weak. It happens because your values are intact. When we treat ethical harm like a stress management issue, we unintentionally turn systemic injury into personal failure, and shame skyrockets, which in turn makes burnout even more likely. In reality, moral injury increases when clinicians face prolonged short staffing, lose control over decisions about clinical care, and are forced into ethically painful decisions when there are no good choices, so we have to choose the one that isn't as harmful. All of what I just said are modifiable organizational conditions, not individual weakness, because you cannot self-care your way out of a broken system. So here we are, holding space while tending to our own activation in real time. Think of your mental, physical, and emotional energy as currency, and moral injury acts as inflation. When your threat system is online and activated, regulation and attunement in the therapy room could cost us more, eventually leaving us in debt. Existing tasks may take more energy, we might have more decision fatigue, and this is even compounded when there is less space in between crises. You may be able to function, but everything costs more. This prolonged stress can lead to irritability, sleep disruption, brain fog, emotional numbing, withdrawal, and loss of joy. Secondary traumatic stress, aka vicarious trauma, adds another layer to this. Repeated exposure to suffering and impossible care decisions is linked to long-term emotional distress, trauma-like symptoms, burnout, and withdrawal. Collective crisis significantly amplify the impact of secondary traumatic stress and nervous system depletion. Being impacted by this vicarious trauma can look very much like PTSD symptoms that includes hypervigilance, exhaustion, avoidance, and intrusive thoughts. So clinicians, what is one necessary element for developing post-traumatic stress? I can tell you it is not poor boundaries, it is exposure. This is also true for secondary traumatic stress, and the only way to reduce it is to reduce exposure. So if you find yourself thinking, I used to be more patient, I used to really love this work, I used to be able to think faster, that could be the result of the impact of exposure. When clinicians hold trauma while living inside crisis themselves, exhaustion is biological and predictable and is not a personal failure. Your body is doing exactly what it was designed to do under a threat response. There's something in the conversation about moral injury and burnout that does not get named enough. So let's slow down and name it. Holding space is not culturally neutral. Think about it. During a crisis, who is expected to endure quietly, keep giving, and be the calm in the room? That answer falls along lines of gender, race, class, immigration status, and institutional power. Research shows that clinicians with less autonomy and fewer resources experience significantly higher rates of burnout. That would include women, clinicians living with a disability, people of the global majority, two-spirited LGBTQ+ clinicians, and others who are systemically marginalized. And they carry disproportionate emotional labor inside systems that don't protect them. Burnout does not happen in a vacuum, it follows power lines. This is visible now with staffing shortage, unequal resources, and widening gaps between private practice and under-resourced agencies. Trauma-informed care for our clients and for ourselves must include safety, power, and context. Otherwise, we're teaching regulation while leaving people in environments that constantly activate their nervous systems and leave them under threat. That house that's burning down, it's like we're giving people a bucket of water in one hand and lighter fluid in the other, and then blaming their bodies for getting burned. So we need to examine our own proximity to power and ask, which bodies are shielded from risk and which aren't? Who has agency and who doesn't? Who gets ethical support and who gets alienated? Maybe you relate to this, or maybe you have a colleague who will. So let's name it and say it louder for the people in the back. Burnout, moral injury, and exhaustion are predictable outcomes of real-world systems and not personal failure. So what actually helps when burnout isn't just about being tired? Recovery has to happen at 3 levels: values, health, including physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, and practice design. So first, repair the moral wound by naming the value violation. Was it dignity, safety, justice, access to care, or integrity? Second, restore agency in small ways. Set limits and decline misaligned demands when you can. Consult. Practice advocacy and lean into your community. Isolation intensifies moral injury and connection repairs it. Third, protect your nervous system. You can practice micro resets between sessions, maybe boundaries with media, and then somatic downshifts and practices that fit your body and your culture. And finally, redesign practice. Caseload caps, protected admin time, clear policies, and ethical workload limits. Instead of the idea about better boundaries, think about ethical limits that protect the quality of care that you provide. We can listen to our experience as well. And ask yourself, if burnout isn't personal failure, what is this feeling asking you to protect, change, or heal? Thank you for joining me today. And before you go, if today's episode resonated with you, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss future conversations about burnout recovery, moral injury, nervous system healing, and sustainable clinical practice. I would also like to invite you to join me in the weekly Relet newsletter, where I offer some grounded tools, strategies, and reflections on how to stay in this work without losing yourself. As a bonus, if you join the newsletter, you have access to my reset checklist based off the 5 pillars of the Relit practice, and also news about upcoming programming and events that you might be interested in. You can check the show notes for those links, and also links to some of the research that I referenced in today's episode, and some guided reflective questions that might help you on your journey. Thank you for the work that you do and for taking time to care for yourself. I'll see you next week.